Hi, welcome to GV Face, Global Voices Google Hangout series. I am Fatin and I am in Amsterdam. We're joined by Joey Ayoub in Beirut. Today we'll be talking about Lebanon and the trash crisis and the recent protests that have swept Beirut's streets. Joey Ayoub is one of our contributors at Global Voices and has been working closely with the You Stink movement in Beirut. Hi, Joey.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Well, I'm glad you
Good.
can join us today after working so hard. So
Yeah.
I've been in Beirut with you actually like about 3 weeks ago, and we were attending the first protest in downtown at the Martyr Square. And there were about only 200 people in the protest, and that escalated really quickly to over 20,000 people on the 22nd and the 23rd. So can you take us a little back and tell us how did this start? What happened, and how did the trash crisis start, basically?
Okay, so it started actually very simply. There's only one landfill which serves Beirut and Mount Lebanon, which is roughly half of the Lebanese population. And this landfill is in the city of Naameh in southern Beirut, south of Beirut. And then the landfill of Naameh basically shut down on July the 17th because the people of Naameh shut it down once and for all. They had actually tried to shut it down many times in the past. They managed to do it for 5, 6 days last year. They were promised by the government that they would only have to endure it for one more year, and obviously the government didn't keep its promises, so they shut it down themselves, which led to the beginnings of the crisis that we are in today, which is when we saw all the trash basically overflowing Beirut and Mount Lebanon.
Right. So how did you expect that to happen when you first went out, the movement first started? And if you tell us a bit how it started and how what role technology played into it, basically, did you expect that number to grow, for it to be that
Mm.
important?
No, no, we really didn't have any long-term expectations, to be honest. We just went down to the streets because we felt we should. On the very first major protest, which was about a month ago, it was a Saturday. It was organized because the parliament had decided to to postpone meeting to discuss the crisis. So they didn't even meet up to discuss the crisis, and we were already one week deep with the trash just filling our streets. So it was on a Thursday, and they decided to postpone it on Tuesday, and basically, so that's how we started. We met up on Saturday on the streets. We were less than 100, 150, I think, something like that. And after that, we decided to have an open discussion on the streets in Riyadh Salah Square. And it's after that that basically the You Stink movement was born. It was very spontaneous. We didn't really know each other before then, and that's how it started. And the way technology plays, obviously, it's because it allowed us to democratize, I guess, the message, because most mainstream media in Lebanon, all of them actually, are either owned by a powerful corporation or by a political party. So most of them don't have much of an interest in covering these things, obviously, since they represent the system and the status quo.
But why, we'll get personal a little bit, but why did you join? Why did you think it was important? And maybe how does that relate to the rest of the people? Why now? Why is it so important? And what are the
Well,
goals?
I mean, I've been in several movements in the past. The difference between this one and the one before is that one, we didn't really have a choice, so it kind of forced us to get out on the street because the alternative was just seeing trash getting piled in front of your house, and that's obviously dangerous for both health reasons and basic life standards. So what the difference that this made compared to other issues, if you want, is that it really forced us to face the system We are in, and it actually makes much sense in Arabic when we say things like "طلعت ريحتكم," so basically you stink, and we always have this imagery of the members of parliament being trash bags. And the metaphors were just perfect because in the same way that we are disgusted by the smells around us, this is really the attitude that we've always had towards our government and our system. It's really a matter of disgust in the end. So in a way, the trash was kind of a concrete representation of the system we live in, basically.
So, if you tell us, what are the goals of the movement, and the people who are protesting the street? What do they want?
Well, it developed in two parts, I would say. First, it was for the first couple of weeks or first 3 weeks, it was literally just about the trash. So it was about demanding the government to find sustainable solutions because we knew that the government was only planning on just building more and more landfills, which was a very unsustainable way of dealing with the situation. And we knew that the only reason why the government was following that method is because it was making profit out of it via the private companies to clean. And we didn't want that anymore. So it was kind of a like it's kind of our opportunity basically to take back this green image that we have about Lebanon. I mean, the cedars on our flags, sorry. And this has always been, green Lebanon has always been the symbol of Lebanon. So now that we saw that our forests were being filled with trash, which is what many of the government trucks have been doing, just dumping it in trash and reserves and next to the sea, and if really an environmental catastrophe just waiting to happen. So yeah, I guess that answers the question. Yeah.
So on the 22nd, and then followed by the 23rd, mass protests, happened in Lebanon. 10,000 the first day, 20,000 the second day. What happened these 2 days, and how did the events of these 2 days affect the movement as a whole? If you tell us.
Well, this will be the start of the second part of the movement, I guess, because now we're talking about the 22nd of August as basically the beginning of a new Lebanon. It really stuck as the symbolic date because this was the date when we really saw the brutality of the state we live in. We were viciously repressed by the police, just the police haphazardly beating random people, old women, kids, just throwing.
Well, I think we're having a little bit of technical issues. We probably lost Joey for a little bit, but hopefully he will be back soon. The electricity sometimes goes off in Lebanon, and that's expected. So if you have any questions and you're watching us live, please send us some, and we will try to answer your questions. And hopefully, meanwhile, Joey will be joining us back. He was talking about the 22nd and the 23rd. Obviously, a lot of people went down to the streets to protest. There were clashes between the people and the police. Some violence took place. Joey was in the part of the protest on the streets, on the ground, witnessing first-hand accounts, and hopefully when he gets back he will be telling us what he actually saw and what he witnessed. When I was in Lebanon about 3 weeks ago, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, and I was with Joey at one of the protests, and people were literally wearing masks on their faces from the trash, and they were trying to mobilize and get together, and I sensed a little bit of frustration, trying to get more people to come out and more people to believe in the cause. And the Youth Think movement worked so hard in terms of getting people and flyers, and they were printing T-shirts to get people to come out and speak up. And then I left Lebanon, and the movement kept going. And days later, weeks later, there were more than 20,000 people taking to the streets and protesting and active on social media like I have never witnessed before, actually, in Lebanon. And Youth Think movement actually has a Facebook group and a Twitter account, and they've been posting videos of police brutality, and they've been posting pictures of trash all over Beirut and Mount Lebanon, on the streets, on the roads, next to universities, next to houses, and people have been having a hard time getting through. And from talking to Joey and other activists on the ground, they have been complaining of the government basically only offering not even temporary solutions, but literally postponing solutions and taking trash from one area and dumping it in another area, and the people have had enough. So Joey has joined the call again, and shortly, momentarily, we're gonna have him back live, and he will take us back to the protest. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Back.
Yeah, we had an interesting
Lebanese moment.
Yeah, so sorry, where was I?
So we were talking, I was just talking a little bit about the protest and how you were there witnessing first-hand accounts, and so if you can tell us again briefly what you saw, because you were there and you were with the people and you've witnessed the event. So if you tell us like a few stories and what really happened these 2 days.
So stories of what has happened. I mean, yeah, so I guess I was talking about Saturday the 22nd specifically as being the start of the movement. So Saturday, as I said, we were brutally repressed by the police. The police was just haphazardly beating people, water canning everyone, tear gassing any group of people, regardless of whether they were protesters, as they saw them, as unarmed which meant basically that they had plastic bottles. That's what they considered arms, or old ladies or kids or really anyone. It was very, very, very vicious. So the 22nd of August turned the environmental cause into more than just an environmental cause. We demanded accountability as one more of the demands that we were demanding from the government. And in addition, we were demanding, and we are still demanding, the resignation of the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Interior, Mohammed Nashnu and Nahar Mashnu. So these 2 days, and Sunday was even more brutal, I should mention. So these 2 days were kind of the beginning of the movement, because it basically forced everyone to realize that there was no turning back. Yeah.
So do you feel like this will affect even like the future and the people now? And how do you basically, why are you still going? What keeps you going to the streets and keeping the momentum of this many people? How do you do that, and why?
I'm sure many people have their own reasons, and it has to do with individual motivation at the end of the day. But the collective anger and the collective disgust as at what's happening to Lebanon is quite severe, and it's quite serious, and it even includes people who are traditionally affiliated with political parties. We've seen people who are affiliated, for example, with their own movement, or with Hezbollah, or with Amal, or with the Lebanese forces, or many other groups. Just come down with us on the streets and telling us that while they still support their political party, they refuse to accept the members of parliament who supposedly represent them, because they realize that our parliament is an illegitimate parliament, because this is a parliament that has extended its own term twice, which is against the Lebanese constitution. And obviously the political deadlock for the past year a year and a half or so, has left us without even a president. So we are really in a political deadlock in this country. And this is having catastrophic impact on so many aspects of Lebanese life.
So as a member or a protester and a Lebanese citizen, and working closely with the Youth Tank movement, what are the solutions that you are proposing, and what do you have in mind to solve this trash crisis? I mean, obviously corruption is a bigger issue, but what do you propose?
I mean, it's quite simple. We're basically proposing to do what we were doing before the government decided to give a private company monopoly over the waste situation. We are basically saying that since many municipalities want to clean up their own residents' waste, then they should be allowed to do it, instead of having to waste money from their own budget to pay some private company which is based in Beirut to come up wherever they live and pick up their own trash. This is a very unsustainable way of doing things. It's completely wasteful, and the only reason why it has been maintained until today, literally the only reason, is because people in power were making profit out of it. So what we're asking is obviously we're asking for more people to recycle at the source. We have seen a huge movement of people doing it now. We're asking for large businesses and small businesses to do it as well. We're basically saying that we can't be a green country if only 6% of the population, 6% of the waste we produce is recycled. That's an approximate figure, instead of something like 90%. If we were at 90% 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had this waste crisis to begin with.
I want to go back a little bit to some more personal stories. Do you remember, we don't know, the people don't really know who's behind these movements always, and who's on the ground. Do you have any stories or accounts that you remember of people who are really putting themselves out there and risking their lives and really working so hard? Any stories you want to share?
Yeah, well, I can start with the very, very first protest. As I said, we were barely 150 people. But when we protested, we were just marching for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think, before we stopped. And when we stopped on Riyadh Salah Square, we realized that there was really no point in going home at this point, because we hadn't really achieved anything. So without anyone actually saying that hey guys, let's meet up to discuss things, we just knew that this is what we should do. So just small groups were spontaneously formed on that square, and then we became one large group, and then some people were speaking out, and they became the unofficial spokespersons of the movement. And basically we were talking about how to solve the crisis, and this is when we had environmental experts again on our side. We still have them with us today, explaining to us, for those who didn't really know the technicalities of the issue, why this waste crisis was happening in the first place. And we really realized at the end of the day that it really did not have to exist. It's really a situation like many of the issues of Lebanon that only exist because of the complete either unwillingness or incapability, or both of them mixed somehow, of the government to even deal with it. We're talking about very, very basic sanitation measures that we learn about when we were 14 years old in school. And so the fact that our central government, which is supposed to represent authority in this nation, is not even capable, to solve this basic issue really shows that we live in a very, very dangerous situation at this moment, and we had to act.
Well, actually, it's interesting you're saying that because we also have a question from someone. I'll read it out to you. It says, sounds interesting. I'm just curious about the level of internet freedom in Lebanon and what effects, if any, it has on the You Stink protest or movement. It's from
Well, we do have instances of censorship in Lebanon, but when it comes to general internet use, it's relatively free. We don't have this kind of blocking the internet or these kinds of things. I have been able to tweet and Facebook and WhatsApp constantly, almost 24/7 for the past month and a half, without any issue. The issue that we have in Lebanon is not about internet freedom; it's about the internet itself. The fact that we have one of the slowest internet connections in the world, and obviously this affects the way we communicate in the movement, how if something goes viral online, on these kinds of things. But I mean, we just adapt to the situation, obviously, because it is it is an issue, but compared to the larger issue at hand, it's not much of a priority at the moment.
All right. Well, we're going to move on a little bit to the challenges because with every protest and solutions that you're proposing, and this many people being part of it in the government, what are the challenges that the movement, You Stink movement, is facing, and the Lebanese people as a whole moving forward?
Well, the challenges have been, especially this week, because there have been especially on Sunday, we've had lots of chaotic developments. People were not expecting this kind of violence, as I said, on Saturday, and they were even expecting it less on Sunday. We were not expecting the government to basically repeat the pathetic and disgusting mistakes it had done on Saturday. But obviously it did, and we had twice the number of people on a very small stretch of land, because Beirut, again, one of the issues that we have is that we don't have much public space. So we were quite cramped, and as soon as the violence started, people were panicking, and there had been lots of injuries after that. So we're trying to avoid that, for example, just as a matter of basic logistics. We're trying to avoid that happening again by moving the protest to a larger area, which is Martyr Square, which is going to be tomorrow at 6 p.m. In terms of the challenges of the movement as a whole, it's still very, very hard to properly analyze at this point, because we're talking about something that has never happened in Lebanese history. We're talking about something that is completely not only spontaneous but also large in size, because as I said, we've had movements in the past. Anti-sectarian movements in the past have been happening for the past 2 decades. In my lifetime, I remember at least a dozen of them. But we have never seen something that has been able to shake the system as severely as something that we're witnessing today. So this would be the main difference, I would say. So regardless, I always say that regardless of what happens, even if the movement dies out in a week, which I seriously doubt it would, because from what I can see, it's just getting bigger and bigger. But even if it does die out in a week, this is still something that's completely new in Lebanese history, and it's basically breaking new ground and showing people that if they want to act on the political scene, they can, and that the government is really incapable, absolutely incapable, inherently incapable, and structurally incapable of dealing with basic public services that affect very seriously the lives of so many Lebanese, especially those, obviously, of the working class. Yeah, I guess I answered that.
Well, before wrapping up, I wanted to ask you a very non-typical question in an interview, but how do you feel working for over a month with this movement, as a young person who's, I don't know if you've ever witnessed a protest like that before, but being part of it, how do you feel? How does that take the toll?
I mean, there have been ups and downs, obviously. In the past week, we've had lots of downs, but since Saturday, and since we've seen lots of the anger online that has come out after August the 22nd, I can really tell you that I'm witnessing something that my parents and my grandparents are telling me that they have never seen before in Lebanon. So this is something that is literally new in Lebanese history. And obviously that's very exciting and that's very motivating, because we always say in Lebanon that we have such a huge potential that's always being wasted by such a corrupt government and such a sectarian system. And the fact that people are starting to challenge it means that it is inevitable that it will crumble eventually. We're just basically breaking new ground at this point.
All right, so one person wanted to know about the official accounts of the You Stink movement, the Facebook and the Twitter accounts. If you can tell people where to find the information, that
Yeah,
would.
I mean, it's written in Arabic. It's Talayt Headcom in Arabic. We can post a link on GV Face if you want in the end. It's hard to spell out. On Twitter, we have several unofficial accounts. We don't have an official account. We're just focusing on Facebook at this moment.
All right, well, I think we're wrapping up the interview right now, and thank you so much for joining us, even though you're so busy. And we actually might have another question. Let me just see if we can read
Sure.
it out if you have a minute. Are there any plans for You Stink movement if the government on the long run continue the status quo? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is it possible that this status quo will radicalize the demands more than just improving public services?
Yeah, well, that actually the second question actually answers the first one. Yeah, so we don't want things to get this radicalized. We don't want things to get this extreme. And we've been telling the government from the very beginning that if it doesn't if it doesn't meet basic demands, then we will not be able to control the anger that we are seeing on the streets. So far, despite the incidents, things have been relatively under control. We have been relatively been able to convince people, especially those who were, let's say, who were more violent than others, who were persuaded that violence would solve things more than non-violence. We were able to convince them that we are leading somewhere because of the pressure that we have been doing on the government and the fact that it's basically the news of the moment 24/7 on almost all TV stations. So we don't want the second scenario to happen. So which is why we're basically focusing on keeping the pace that we're at the moment.
And how long do you think this will be? Well, you can could put it under control, basically. Where do you see this going in the short
Well,
term?
so far, I can say that it is under control, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be in the near future. I'm just saying that if the government does not meet our demands, which I personally think it would eventually because the pressure is getting stronger and stronger, then we would have a situation that most of us wouldn't be able to control, but hopefully we won't have to reach to that level.
Okay, well, we have actually one more question. Sorry to keep you.
Yeah.
What made the government's action arise to such a violent reaction? Is the government afraid of an Arab Spring uprising in Lebanon?
I mean, the Arab Spring, I would say, is not very. It's not a very useful analogy in Lebanon, just because we don't have a dictator in the sense of the traditional Arab powers. Lebanon has a much more complicated and annoyingly so system. So we're basically fighting a whole system that is deeply embedded in the culture and the political culture and the political life of every single Lebanese citizen. So as to why did the government react that way? Then yeah, I would say it's fear, because despite besides the fact that it was very very violent on Saturday, I think the main way of describing what had happened to us on Saturday and Sunday is just that it was pathetic. We really saw at one point we had over 400, 500 policemen for maybe something like 200 protesters at the very beginning before the 10,000 people came up. And the amount of security was unbelievable. I joked on Twitter that we were expecting some kind of invasion by Israel and ISIS at the same time. And because the amount of security was really, really baffling for everyone that saw it.
Well, we thank you for all of the information that you're giving us, and we want to thank the people who joined and asked the questions, Mohammed, Demba, and Manuel. And hopefully, if there are more questions, we can answer them in a post later, and they can follow on Twitter, and we'll post that as well. Thanks, Joey, again, despite the internet problems, and hopefully we will keep this coming and follow up with your story. And thanks,
Right.
everyone, for watching.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Bye.